Hello, Christian. Let's kick things off today. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you've been working on.
Absolutely. Well, first, let me say thank you to you, Jenny and Leah, for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Christian Ortiz. In community, they call me Zacateco for my Zacatecan lineage and my role in tech. I am a decolonial technologist and social scientist and the creator of Justice AI, which is the world's first AI framework that solved the AI bias problem.
Justice AI sounds incredible. Like we see in the rise of AI in the past few years, we've seen so much about its inherent bias. Yeah, it's incredible that that's being solved. And by you, and in fact, we've got you on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It is a big problem that we've that's been identified pretty early on in AI. And then when I discovered it firsthand by doing pilot testing on ChatGPT 3.5 back in 2022, I realized pretty quickly that I had an opportunity to build a framework that was going to make the difference.
Definitely. I'm building my own tech stack using Python at the moment and like doing my own bits and building my own AI platform. And I've really found that you have to be very purpose driven and you have to know exactly what you're doing and the intention behind it in order to create a system that is useful and kind to all of its users.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think what I noticed when I was getting into the space of tech was that we were still stuck in a state of awareness as we are in society. We understand we have a problem. We understand we have bias. But we never really asked the question, well, where does it come from? Where does it stem from? And what can we do about it? And when I started asking those questions and collaborating with experts from around the world, I immediately realized that we had to, it's kind of like a medical doctor diagnosing the cancer at its root or the disease at its root to figure out that the cause ultimately was colonial white supremacy. And nobody wants to talk about it, which is the reason why Western institutions kind of scoff at the work that I do because I'm challenging the system straight on. But it isn't everybody's problem, right? We all have to deal with bias and we've all inherited a system that we didn't ask for. And so until we start having those honest conversations, then we can then start creating these tools and moving forward to really make a difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I guess as I listen to you, I think in the world we're living now, it takes quite a lot of bravery to talk about white supremacism, to challenge a system. We know that AI is kind of owned by the most wealthy people and organizations in the world, and to kind of challenge what it's built on is a big thing. So I'm curious, like, what gives you the courage to do that? What gives you the conviction to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a big part of it was early on in my work as a social scientist, I not only had to understand how the system impacts all of us, especially people who are living in the margins and who have an intersectional identity, that carry many different identities. I myself, I understand I'm a brown man. I'm also a neurodivergent. So, but I also have the privilege of being a male in a lot of spaces. And I had to not only understand my privileges, but I also had to understand how the system impacts white people. And that's
Mm.
part of a conversation that nobody really wants to have. And so I take a look at the historical roots of social psychology of how these systems impact everyone. And then we move from there to have a conversation about collective liberation versus liberation for one group of people versus another, because then we ultimately muddle the waters with oppressive Olympics and
Mhm.
nothing really gets done, right? So we have to understand what I try to do is I balance a duality between educating my users and my audience about AI itself, because there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of fear, and the concept of race as a system versus an identity, because it is a social construct. And when we understand race as a system, we're able to understand and have conversations that kind of not only pull back the curtain, but that makes it safe for me to be able to educate everyone and get people to look at things a lot differently so that we can have these conversations.
Wow. Is this frame, this underpinning, this understanding of what collective liberation looks like, and the fact that actually white supremacism is at the heart of it, but it's not personal, it's a system. Is that what your Justice AI system is grounded on? Is that the framework that underpins it?
100%. 100%. It helps. I built it it's a multi-purpose use tool that organizations can use to identify bias in like policies and procedures, and build inclusive cultures and help HR handle situations properly. But it's also built with the individual framework for the individual itself. So if I was a white man who grew up in a hyper conservative household, and be it in the southern United States or be it in the UK or Australia or South Africa, I now have a tool that I can speak to help understand how I'm not only the byproduct of the system we all inherited, but how it impacts me negatively. And then what happened to my heritage as a white man? Because what happens in a system of white supremacy is it removed the lineage and the culture from Europeans, right? Before colonialism, every white European had a culture, a rich, loving culture, probably not perfect, but they also had traditions and cultures and practices that the system of white supremacy stripped from them. And so this tool helps people understand that in a way that's safe. It's not finger pointing, and it just becomes that best friend of yours that you can have all these conversations with without triggering any emotions. And it's all based on historical fact, proof, and you can cite your sources and all of that. It's just a life-changing tool.
That really sounds amazing. Like, just the way you're explaining it is, yeah, it's amazing. How did you think to start this? Or I guess, do you have a background in tech? Or, I found out, on doing my research, I found that you work across sectors like chart and real estate, but, the idea to build your own AI platform is quite different from those.
Yeah. I could tell you that I have years and years of experience across multiple industries. I was in hospitality. I was in the restaurant industry for many, many years. I did corporate and ultimately became an entrepreneur right before COVID. And I started my own business in social media marketing as a one-man media company, which is I still own today and operate around the world. But as an activist and getting involved in doing these beta testings with these systems, I realized that my work, regardless of what I did, in order for me to lead with purpose and operate in a way that makes sense for me and to make real impact, I had to find a way to mesh my activism and my entrepreneurship into one. And this took a lot of work because I had to collaborate with initially I began with collaborating with over 560 marginalized professionals from around the world in order to coordinate and have them contribute their knowledge for the last 30 years into this data set. And so that took such a long time to collaborate with all these professionals. And you can imagine that after 30 years of being in their industry and speaking about it and writing about it, and of course, never having a spotlight shined on them, they were kind of just living in the shadows. And so this was an opportunity for 560 individuals to create the world's first decolonized data set, is what I call it. So I built this system in OpenAI's ChatGPT because it not only has the largest data set, but it's the most biased data set with over 50 million biased outputs a day. So we're not only being problematic using the system, we're automating oppression basically. And so when you have this extension of Justice AI, it literally automatically identifies the bias for you, and it can pick it up in the blind spots that all of us have because let's just face it, collectively as a society, we've never been taught about how any of this operates. So for the first time in the history of the world, we now have this tool to do so. And I hope that
Wow.
answered your question. I feel like I'm going on tangents, but my coffee hasn't really set in yet. So
No,
forgive
no,
me.
it's fine. It's so interesting just hearing you speak about all the biases in ChatGPT, because I would probably say that is the most used, AI chatbot globally. I do think with things like ChatGPT, unless you're aware that there is bias and you're willing to really go specifically into what you want and who you are, it will give you the wrong advice. It won't be your best friend that you need it to be. It won't be giving you the correct information. It's just, yeah, everything you've said is so interesting. I think the 560 gives really a lot of weight to it. The fact that you reached out to that many people and got that much data, it just gives a lot of weight to what you're aiming to do. And I think that's great to hear. But also the size of the problem that you illustrated, like all of the questions we're asking daily and the fact that we're getting so many biased responses. And I'm kind of curious about what that actually looks like. Like, what should we, if we're not able, well, we should be using Justice AI, we should be using your system, but just say we are still, for some reason, using one of the existing large language models as the basis for our questions. How can we challenge back? How can we be more aware that we're getting biased output, really? Is there more we can do to avoid it? Apart from using
Absolutely.
Justice AI, which, we're definitely on board for.
No, absolutely. And that's a fantastic, necessary question as well. I
Mm,
think that what I always try to explain to individuals using AI, going back to my point where I'm having to educate my users on the responsible usage of it, is to understand that it is a tool to co create, that it's not the be all, even when it gives you the answer. And so always challenge it. Always say, where does this response miss the mark? Can you identify the bias in this remark? And really try to start from that starting point to help your brain kind of rewire itself, because the process of using a system like this is to unlearn everything we've literally been taught, which is part of the deconstruction and part of what gives us the hesitation and the inner pushback that comes out. But it's also to ask the right questions, because this stuff matters and it's inevitable. It's coming regardless, right? I think the best way to do it is to challenge the system and ask those questions. Where does it miss the mark? Where's the bias here? And even when it gives you that response, push back again and say, what are you not saying here? Or where can I go deeper? Because those questions matter. But even what I've found, which is very interesting, which is also a huge testament to what we've built with Justice AI, is that I do that with regular ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or all these other language models. And I run those final results into Justice AI, and Justice AI is still like, it's still giving you a neutral answer. It's still not naming white supremacy as the main violator here, to help you understand what the root cause of this is. And so this is why Justice AI just always is on top of everything. And so it's, just to answer your question, the long answer, I think it's just to always push back and remember you're co-creating something to be as inclusive as possible.
Thank you so much. And there's a lot of unlearning for all of us to do, no matter our background.
Yes.
A lot of the research says that even if you're from a minoritized background, you are biased against people from minoritized backgrounds because that's what you've been learning. So it's not as if we'd automatically spot it just because of our background. So it's so helpful. But I want to go off slightly, and I want to understand your LinkedIn posts, which I love. They start with, is it Leah? I don't know. I'd love to know what you're saying at the beginning of all of your LinkedIn posts.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah, oye mira is something that's used in Puerto Rico. So they say oye mira, like hey, look, like
Ah,
it's an immediate grab, right, for your attention.
okay.
And so
Okay.
I use it because not everybody understands what it means, but they are always like, what is this? It's got to mean something. And then it pushes them to either explore or ask me questions about it. But it's just, it's the main hook for all of my branding and for my marketing.
Love it. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just going back a little bit to Justice AI, when I was doing my research on it, I was seeing that you guys use indigenous data sovereignty and intersectional ethics. And I was wondering how you make sure those values are honored. Obviously, I know, well, we know, and everyone listening will now know, what Justice AI is grounded in and grounded upon. But how do you make sure that those values are honored, especially when working with such diverse groups?
Yeah, that's such a necessary question to ask, because especially your listeners who are going to probably be building AI systems as well. Ultimately, it comes down to who has a seat at the table in terms of the data that's being trained on, who gets decision making opportunities. And when we talk about decision making in this aspect, it's, let's say a tribe in New Zealand is using Justice AI, and they notice that something like an output is wrong based off the data set, and they say that's outdated and this isn't how we look at something right now. They have the opportunity to reach out and say, hey, can we change this? Can we update this into the system? And that happens probably couple times a week from individuals from around the world, from different parts of the communities that we've built this on. But to answer your question more directly, I think it was part of the building process for this. This is why I had to reach out to experts and individuals from around the world so that we can capture what indigeneity looks like from Central America, South America, Australia, to the 7 tribes here in Canada, to the tribes even in southern United States and around. And then we look at even Middle Eastern cultures. We have programming that really reflects a cultural competency and understanding from around the world, allowing and making sure that we stay connected to those communities from around the world as much as we possibly can, so that we have updated information all the time. And so it's very accurate. And so that way, that is probably one of the hardest challenges for the business itself. You can imagine just always constantly testing and updating with communities. But for the most part, what we found in a 2-year test process is that the information, it stays pretty much the same across the board, unless there's something major that's shifted, right? Language changes and practices change, even especially through the LGBTQ community. Maybe there's another type of sexuality that people are exploring. And so we want to make sure that we have language for all of that, so that the system can explain it so fluidly and perfectly to the user.
Yeah, that sounds, just so amazing and so thorough as well. So done with intention.
Yeah.
Yeah, so done with intention, and it's amazing what the work you're doing. I think as well, it's great that you are constantly staying updated. I think that's also the hard thing. In our previous series, we were speaking to a guest who was saying that there are 4 generations of AI a year. That's a lot of updating, especially when you come to think about all the other things that are changing in the world culturally. So it is incredible that you guys are managing to stay up to date. I know that with my own platform and my own data set, it's constantly changing as well. It's like a constant battle to try and remain afloat with all the things that you need to do, but it's also necessary.
Absolutely. And that's such a valid point, because even creating it on the back end, these systems are pretty limited for the most part. Like there's only a certain amount of document so that you're allowed to upload on the back end for the training data. So you have to find ways to create master data documents, right, that are thousands of pages long, so that you can then make sure that you literally have everything, which means you also need an auditing system. You need to make sure that you're not missing the mark on what you're updating, and that it's not outdated. And that requires also weekly meetings with people from around the world to make sure, hey, I got this in. Is there anything else you need me to add before I push it? Like, there's so much that goes behind it. And so, this is a very tedious process for sure, but it's so well worth it when you see the outcome.
Oh, 100%. I really can imagine, the humans and the people need to live together. We all need to work together, everyone globally. And AI, I guess, is probably going to be one of us in 50 years or something like that.
One of us.
One of us.
One of us.
It definitely sounds like a labor of love. I guess, have you had pushback? Have you had any people say, AI is AI and it's fine and we don't need these additional kinds of AI? We spoke to someone who had a feminist AI. Someone was talking about AI that was also had religious beliefs sort of inbuilt within it, for example. And now you're talking about justice AI. And I wonder, is anyone saying, no, we just need one? Or what you're talking about doesn't even exist? Do you get any of that?
I get all the pushback. I get all the smoke. It's really interesting, though. And that's a great question, because it manifests so differently for so many different groups, especially individuals which are completely valid in their concerns about systems. And we've seen how AI has been weaponized towards marginalized groups for almost a decade now, right? From facial recognition to scans of all types, and now language models being the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones. But what I always tell individuals is that having the indigenous sovereignty and the religious sovereignty and the sovereignty of humanity to understand that it's not, feminism isn't a problem or religion isn't a problem. It's how these systems are weaponized against others, right? And how the messages become muddled when they're backed with really just the most improper foundation. I don't really know how to put it without insulting or sounding like I'm judging at all. But what the system does, it understands that it respects what people's stances are in terms of how they view the world and what their messaging is, as long as it's rooted in truly collective liberation, right? Where it's really not causing harm in any capacity to the society, and it's not able it's not able to, right? The system will not. So you can try to convince it to do whatever, and it'll push back every single time. And it won't even create a hypothetical for you, right? And so, but the pushback is real. The pushback I get more even on African American communities and Latino communities in the States who feel like they won't be seen properly. Also, my Black and brown communities in Europe also. They want to make sure that, well, my experience with racism is different here in the state or in Europe, right? Versus the States. And so the pushback is really just an unknowing about the system itself. And what I always tell people is when you see it and we conduct experiments in real time, it makes all the sense, right? It alleviates all the stress right off your shoulders. And it just makes sense when you see the outputs. And especially if you resonate with the community that you're trying to test it as, right? If I was coming in as a part of any other marginalized group and I was asking it questions that I wanted to make sure that this system understood, you see it in a heartbeat. So that's kind of the blessing of it, is that it just makes sense when you see it. And so it's a slow process. There's not really a good way to market something like this, right? There's 1,000,001 examples that I can use in creating posts or articles about it. But at the end of the day, it's a case by case situation. And so I always say this, more than a business, this is a movement, because it really invites individuals one by one to start using it. And ultimately, I see myself in this space for the next 30 years using tools like this, building tools like this, because if 1,000,000 people were able to get their hands on an ethical AI and use it properly, you can only imagine what impact that would make around the world. So it's kind of the purpose behind all of it.
Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. I think that's a mission. We're going to sort of, when we put this out there, we're going to have to say that. Let's get that 1,000 people
Yes,
started. Continue that movement going forward.
absolutely. So I'm not too worried about the numbers. I'm not too worried about anything. This isn't, would my dream be to sell this to a large language model like OpenAI for them to adopt it and all of a sudden decolonize the largest data set? Absolutely. But we have to be realistic too, right? Because that's just challenging the system that we're working on. So this has to be grassroots, because there is no company in the world that's going to be like, yes, I want this to call out the racism in my company and the sexism and the patriarchy. And, that just doesn't happen. And so I'm working with social impact organizations right now around the world. So if they're coaches, if they're DEI coaches, if they are working in HR systems and they have OpenAI in the company, why not just buy an extension? I'm also creating custom GPTs for organizations too, powered by Justice AI. So it can be programmed to understand how the business works, their history of where they missed the mark. Maybe they've had years of legal issues that the system needs to know about and how to mitigate that. And it's not to arm these companies with a tool that allows them to work around the discrimination. It's literally to gut it out, unroot it, and plant something new.
I love that metaphor. So when we're thinking about the workplace, do you think that humans and AI share the responsibility at work? Or do you think it's humans augmented by AI? Or do you think AI is going to be doing most of it and we're just going to do the odd check? Where do you see it going?
I do. I see it coming. I think right now I'm trying to be as loud as I can be online, because what I see we're headed in two directions. And right now we have the opportunity of choosing which path we want to go down to. To your point, I think that one of the possibilities is that we just adopt all these AI systems. We don't take a look at how we build them. We keep excluding the marginalized individuals in the data set, and we just use it irresponsibly. And it starts automating the suppression, is the way I call it, right? You keep using these data sets outside of just making like manual updates or something that maybe you want to sort emails and it automates that. That's totally different. I think when it comes to how we use AI to engage with one another, this is where the game changes. And so right now, what I'm trying to do is be the voice to say, hey, we really got to take a look at how we're using this, if it's impacting people of all varieties. And I think that we're at the fork of the road, and we're just looking at which way to go right now, because some people are waiting for it to get worse and some people are actively trying to prevent it from getting better. And I'll end this by saying where we're heading is AGI, right? Where this is a generative AI that starts thinking for itself without prompting, and you can literally have conversations with it. And this is, after doing all the research that I can, it looks super problematic only because if we have an AGI system now that operates through the system of white supremacy, then it's going to literally operate through its biases if it's not programmed properly. This is why decolonizing AI is the number one priority, in my opinion, that everybody should be focused on in one way or another, whether you adopt my system or you build your own. But I think this is where we have to start collectively having that conversation to prevent true chaos and madness before this is locked into a system that we can't control.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've been doing quite a bit of research myself into AGI. I think that idea of AI having generalized intelligence, that means it can have a conversation with you based on someone else's beliefs. It's
Yes.
terrifying because we've all had the opportunity to be able to do our own research, our own reading. Obviously, some people do get indoctrinated with beliefs, but they have so many other external sources to stop that, to stop any negative indoctrination. And I think it's terrifying the amount of people that rely on AI in their everyday life to make basic decisions. Imagine it being able to just think something off the top of its processor. I was going to say head, but it doesn't have a head. I think it's terrifying. I think that without the correct intervention, as you said, it could go very, very, very wrong. But I think that there's so many opportunities for positivity with AI as well, with people like you in the world, with so many AI developers out there trying to do the right thing, trying to stop bad things. I don't believe that AI will ever be the silver bullet that gets the human race. I think that we're too unkillable in a way.
Gosh, don't speak too soon.
I feel like we're a bit like, I don't know, I was going to say, I think we're a bit like cockroaches. I think that we can adapt. I think that we can overcome negativity. And I think that if enough people know that about the inherent bias in AI, especially the inherent bias in AGI, I think that who wouldn't want to stop that? Who wouldn't not use it? We were also having a conversation with someone in another episode talking about the gaps in people picking AI up, whether that's with age, with race, with gender. I see AGI being used a lot by people my age. I think people my age in their 20s, early 20s and teenagers as well, really see AI as an opportunity to not have to make decisions. With the kids of COVID, we haven't had that, human interaction. I know for myself, I started university in 2020 and I didn't have in-person classes until my final year. So even that, it's like, we didn't have that human interaction. We definitely don't know as much in some aspects of social interaction. And AI can really bridge that gap. I know a lot of people that use AI as therapy to ask, in what order should I do my day? Should I go to the gym first? Or should I tidy my room first? Things like that. That's quite a common thing within people that I know doing. And I think even though those are harmless questions, the bigger ones, the more important ones will become very problematic with AGI.
No, I agree. And to that point, I'm gonna piggyback off of what you just said, because I just ran a test on it. I just started going back to the gym here at a Planet Fitness. No judgment from my gym bros out there. But what's interesting is that I asked Claude to create a kind of a gym schedule for me and diet plan and all of that. It immediately went to Eurocentric diets. Didn't even ask me what my culture was, whatever. And it really had such biased language on how we see beauty standards. Justice AI immediately was just like, well, what does your diet consist of? What's your culture? What do you normally go to? What are you allergic to? Also, you can work out and not have to conform to the normal standards of gym, so it's just interesting when we have these conversations where you think bias doesn't exist, but it's everywhere. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So imagine this AGI system who operates this way, who has no training data about any marginalized groups. And if you ask it to decolonize, more than likely, it'll be just like OpenAI. OpenAI has 10 decolonial frameworks programmed into it right now. but it's still lacking the intersectional knowledge. It's still lacking so much. The empathy metrics. It can give you decolonial jargon without actually giving you decolonial thought processes, which is completely different. It can sound nice on the surface, but it could still miss the mark in so many ways. And so right now, this is why this conversation is so extremely important for everybody to really understand the dangers. We live in a society that tells you, well, everybody has bias. We can't do anything about it, right? Which is a little true, but now we have an opportunity to unlearn those biases and understand the real dangerous impacts that they have on society.
And if we're listening to AI, and if that's where we're going to get a lot of our information from, if it could be right, it might be able to rewire us finally to be better people. And that would be, the ultimate dream for AI to make us better than we ever were before, rather than wipe us out.
Absolutely.
And yeah, if we can work towards that, I think it would be brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. Staying on this positive note, I was wondering if you've seen many cases where AI has boosted inclusion in ways that even surprised you.
Yes. So right now, and amongst my client list, I have about 20 coaches that they span everywhere from doing power dynamics at the workplace to inclusive DEI work. I have a lot of white coaches, white women, especially in the States, who are so well intentioned and so brilliant, but they miss the mark because they're conditioned by their biases. And so when they are running these tests through Justice AI to say, hey, identify the bias in my coaching platform that I'm about to release to my 1,000 clients, Justice AI can just pinpoint it and tell them and redirect them. And they come to my DMs almost weekly, and they're like, oh my gosh, like I was just about to put this out and this is what Justice AI told me. Thank you so much for this tool. Like, it's those little examples of the use cases that are so unbelievably refreshing for me, that I get to see the real world impact when we talk about leaning on an AI to help guide us to be better and do better. That's world changing. What a gift to have. And I wish I would have had this during my deconstruction, because my deconstruction myself was brutal.
Oh gosh. How did you do it? How did you deconstruct? How did you do that work?
That's a great, wonderful question. I actually really, a lot of it was due to my therapy, but my therapy I didn't know was leading me that way. I grew up in a very hyper patriarchal single mother household, Latina, Puerto Rican, and I grew up where my family would say racist things. My grandmother being African and my grandfather being from Spain, and me being half Mexican, I was othered because I looked indigenous versus my other brothers. I was darker than my other brothers. I got called names in my family. And so I grew up in a very, especially as a child from the 80s and 90s, this was a very, very, very openly toxic, generation. And so raised by Gen Xers and boomers. And so like I had to eventually realize, I think what it was is my son one day told me in church, he didn't want to go to church. And I grew up in a Catholic household. And so he started asking all of these questions that I asked when I was a kid, but I got punished for. And of course I didn't want to be the byproduct of, of my parenting that I got. And so I started asking myself the questions, and ultimately I was just like, he's right. Like, these questions are valid and I don't have the answers for them. So why are we doing this? And it's kind of what spiraled down the hill. And then to find out that how problematic I was with the things that I would say, or the work terminology I used, or my total viewpoints on my patriarchal viewpoints and all of these things. And so I started doing a lot of study, decolonial work, and that was about a decade ago. And so what I did is I just committed myself to reading all of these decolonial theories. And I came about this word decoloniality online, and I can't even remember who said it, but it was an opportunity for me to really deep dive, and I just became completely committed to it. And so as I say all this to say that during that decade of deconstruction, you are left to feel like, oh my God, I was a douchebag for most of my life. Or I was a terrible human being and I didn't know so much. And you battle a lot with that reality, but then you realize that it ultimately falls down to this: when you learn better, you do better. And I truly believe that if individuals were given the opportunity to learn better, they would choose to do better.
Thank you. I just want to really affirm you in that, because there are so many people who actually know that their thinking's not quite right, but they act like a victim of doing something about it. Like, oh, the world thinks I'm a bad person, or I'm behind, or whatever, and they don't actually take action.
Yeah.
But you educated yourself. And I think that's to be commended. I actually wrote something about intellectual humility this week. And I think that's exactly what it is. This idea of actually we can change our mind. And actually changing our mind anchored on strong values is
And
much more powerful than just saying, no, I was born at a time like this, so I'm going to stay thinking like this and saying these things.
yes, it is so valuable. And that is a huge part of what was my driver as well, right? And I think for me too, I kind of operate from this framework of where I carry the necessity of grief. I believe that when individuals grieve something and they lose something because of their belief system that matters so much to them, it's kind of their process where they have to not only grieve what's been lost, but it becomes the activator that says, what am I actually doing with my life? Or what am I doing wrong? And then the problem is that when you get there, you don't have a tool if you're not conditioned enough to educate yourself, or you don't see the value, or you don't even know that there's things out there to educate yourself on. And we get stuck in this realm of awareness, which is what I was talking about in the very beginning of this conversation. Is we're always stuck in this level of awareness, but we don't have any tools to help activate or to move forward. And so that's truly ultimately the purpose of what I'm trying to build, is a tool that everybody can access and give them the opportunity to do that and to see all of this.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think sadly, we're coming to the end of today's conversation. It's been so insightful, but Leah likes to end on some quick fire questions.
I do. I love a quick fire round. So I've got 3 questions here for you. My
Okay.
first one being, what is one myth about ethical AI that you'd love to bust?
One myth about ethical AI that I'd love to bust
Yeah.
is no one is doing it right.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that one. What is one small design tweak that you think could make a big impact?
Always ask questions about your output.
Great. And what are 3 words to sum up your vision for AI and society?
I think that we have to collectively demystify this fear mongering that's happening and the disinformation, and really take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves about what's actually at play, how they operate, and how they work. There's tons of YouTube videos and tons of creators who break it down for people to make it really digestible and easy. I know a lot of the terminology that I use doesn't resonate with many, many people, and I understand that. So I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I think there has to be a starting process for everybody to learn.
Amazing.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation
My
today.
pleasure. I could speak to you all day.
Absolutely. We could speak to you all day. It's been enlightening. And I can't wait to get this out into the world, actually,
Yeah.
to really inspire and educate lots of people.
Thanks for listening to AI for Equity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Stay curious, stay bold, and keep using AI to build a fairer future.